My wife of 28 years had just passed away. At her funeral, in front of 80 people, my own son ripped the microphone out of my hands and yelled, "Shut up and sit down. You don't deserve to speak." I stood there, crying, humiliated, while his father-in-law took my place at the podium. But what happened next changed everything forever. I still remember every detail of that morning on March 19th, 2019. The phone rang at 6:30 a.m. I was in the kitchen fixing breakfast for Serena, just like I had done every morning for over a decade. The voice on the other end belonged to my sister, Carla. I didn't need to hear much to understand. The words hit me like a physical blow. "Alonzo, you need to get to the hospital. Serena had a massive heart attack. The doctors say there's nothing they can do." I dropped my coffee mug. It shattered on the kitchen floor, and the dark liquid spread out like a stain of blood. I don't really remember how I got to the hospital. I guess I drove. I guess I ran red lights. The only thing I recall clearly is walking into that room and seeing her there, still, connected to machines that were now useless. She was 60 years old. I had just turned 62. 28 years together. 28 years of small routines I never valued enough. The coffee I made every morning, the way she'd touch my back as she walked past me, her laugh during movies, the trips we planned and always put off for later. Later never came. My son, Malik, was already at the hospital when I arrived. He was 35 at the time, married to Chloe for nearly a decade. His father-in-law, Langston Vance, was with him. I remember seeing them together in the waiting room, talking in low tones. When they saw me, Malik stood up, but his expression wasn't what you'd expect from a son who had just lost his mother. There were no tears. There was something colder, something calculated. "Well, look who finally showed up, the widower," Langston said, using that tone he always reserved for me. I never liked that man. Too rich, too arrogant, always criticizing my life, my choices, my career as a retired master electrician. To him, I was a failure. A man who never aimed high, who was content with a quiet life with my wife and our house in the Marietta suburbs of Atlanta. Malik hugged me, but it was an empty embrace, without real feeling. Then he explained the funeral details. The service would be at the Ebenezer Memorial Chapel 3 days later. It would be a large service, about 80 people, lots of Serena's friends from work, extended family, and colleagues. "You should prepare something to say," Malik suggested. "Something meaningful. The pastor said someone can speak about the deceased." I don't know why, but right then, I felt like something was off. Something in his tone, in the way Langston was observing us from the sofa. But I was too devastated to care. My wife had just died. The grief took up all the space in my chest. I spent the next 3 days writing. I wrote about how I met Serena in college, how she wanted to be a labor rights attorney but chose to stay home when we discovered she was pregnant with Malik. I wrote about how she worked in an administrative office all those years to support our family while I studied for my electrical licenses. I wrote about her sacrifices, her abandoned dreams, her unbreakable love. The speech was 3 pages long. I practiced it several times at home. My voice trembled every time I read the part about the day Serena told me she wanted to retire. She had worked for 38 years. She was tired. She wanted to travel with me. She wanted to visit Italy. She wanted to see Greece. We had plans, so many plans. The night before the funeral, I didn't sleep. I stayed in the living room, reading and rereading my words. I memorized every paragraph, every phrase. I wanted it to be perfect. It was the last chance I would have to honor the woman who had been everything to me. March 19th, 2019 was the longest day of my life. I arrived at the church at 10 a.m. My sister Carla was waiting outside, her eyes red. We hugged without speaking. Inside the church, white flowers covered every corner. Serena's casket was at the front. I remember walking up to it, touching the dark wood, wondering how it was possible that she was inside. Malik arrived soon after with Chloe and their 2 children, my grandchildren, who barely understood what was happening. Langston Vance walked in behind them, flawlessly dressed in a black suit that surely cost more money than I earned in a month. The pastors started the ceremony. We sang, we prayed. Then came the moment for the tributes. The pastor announced that some people wanted to share words about Serena. First, a friend of hers from the office spoke, then her sister. Both said beautiful things, things that made me cry harder. Finally, the pastor looked at me. And now, Serena's husband, Alonzo Dubois, would like to say a few words. I stood up, my legs trembling. I walked to the pulpit, my papers clutched in my hands. I took the microphone and inhaled deeply. I was about to begin when it happened. Malik suddenly got up. His face was flushed. He walked directly toward me, toward the pulpit, in front of the entire congregation. Carla saw him coming and tried to stop him, but it was too late. "No," Malik yelled. "You are not going to speak." The silence was instant. 80 pairs of eyes turned toward us. I was frozen. I didn't understand what was happening. "Malik, what?" "Shut up and sit down," my son ordered. His voice was filled with a rage I had never seen in him. "You don't deserve to speak here. You don't deserve to honor my mother." He lunged toward me. His hands tugged at the microphone. I tried to hold on to it, but he was stronger, younger. The microphone was yanked from my grasp, hitting the floor with a deafening sound that echoed through the silent church. Langston Vance stood up. I saw a faint smile on his face. "I will speak," he announced, walking toward the pulpit, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. I stood there, stunned, my papers into my hands. My son lightly pushed me toward my seat. "Sit down, Dad," he said. But there was no love in those words. I sat down, my hands shaking. Tears streamed down my cheeks. Not from the grief of losing Serena. That pain I already felt. These were tears of humiliation, confusion, and betrayal. Langston spoke about Serena for 15 minutes. He talked about things he'd heard secondhand. He spoke about her as if he had known her all her life, when in reality he barely saw her on Christmas. He spoke about values, family, and respect. I sat in the front row, crying silently, wondering what I had done wrong, wondering what had happened to my son. The ceremony continued. Then came the cemetery, and then coming home alone. The first seconds after Langston took the microphone were the longest of my life. The sound of his voice filled the church while I remained still in my seat, the pages of the speech I had prepared still in my trembling hands. No one dared to look at me directly. I could feel the side glances, the hushed whispers, the uncomfortable shifting in the pews. Carla was sitting next to me. Her hand found mine. She didn't say anything. There were no words, just pressure, just confirmation that she, too, was shocked by what had just happened. I was 62 years old, and I had never experienced such deep, public, devastating shame. As Langston continued his improvised speech about Serena, I watched Malik. My son was standing next to the pulpit, arms crossed, looking straight ahead, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. As if he hadn't just humiliated his father in front of his entire extended family, work friends, neighbors, and church colleagues. Chloe, Malik's wife, was staring intently at her shoes. Their youngest child, who was just 7 years old, quietly asked his mother why Grandpa was crying. She didn't answer. She just hugged him tighter. I recognized a lot of people in that church. Jade Sinclair, my attorney cousin, was sitting 3 rows back. Our eyes met for a moment. Her expression reflected shock and disbelief. Next to her was Tanya Johnson, Serena's younger sister, who had traveled from Charlotte specifically for the funeral. Her hands were clasped in her lap, and I could see her knuckles were white from clenching them so tightly. Serena's work friends, women with whom she had shared 38 years of daily work, coffee breaks, and life's confessions, were visibly disturbed. Some were whispering among themselves. Others just stared straight ahead, with expressions of utter discomfort. When Langston finally finished his talk, the silence that followed was deafening. He walked down from the pulpit with the composure of someone who had just given a brilliant presentation at a business dinner, not someone who had just witnessed the fracture of a family. He sat down next to Malik. I saw my son pat him on the shoulder, as if congratulating him on a job well done. The pastor continued the ceremony as if nothing had happened. We sang Amazing Grace. We recited prayers, but everything felt distant, as if I were experiencing it outside my own body, as if I were a spectator to my own tragedy. I took the papers with me to the cemetery. Even as Serena's casket was lowered into the earth, I was still holding them. Some people saw them. Some understood what they meant. Others simply didn't know what to make of the information. At the cemetery, while we waited for them to finish covering the grave, Malik approached me. He was completely calm, as if what had happened in the church was completely normal, justified and reasonable. "Dad," he began, his voice low, but audible. "You couldn't have said anything useful anyway." I couldn't even answer. The words caught in my throat. All I could do was look at him, my own son, the person I had raised, educated, fed, and protected for 35 years. I looked at him as if he were a stranger. "Your behavior in that church was unacceptable," was all I managed to say. Malik smiled, a small, almost condescending smile. "My behavior? Dad, you're the one who should be ashamed. We all know what you did, what you let happen. What are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused. But Malik was already walking away, heading back toward where Chloe and his children were. Langston called him over, and they both headed to the cars parked at the cemetery entrance. Carla stayed with me while we covered the casket. She insisted on doing it, even when the grave digger offered to do it for us. She wanted it to be personal. She wanted it to be real. Every shovel full of dirt that fell onto the grave seemed to carry with it a piece of my life, my purpose, my identity. "What did Malik say?" Carla asked as we headed back to the car. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "He said something about what we allowed to happen, but it doesn't make sense. I don't understand what he meant." Carla frowned. Again, I could see she was processing information, connecting dots that I couldn't yet see. "Alonzo, have there been problems between you and Malik? Something you haven't told me?" I thought about this as I drove home. I thought about the last few months. Malik had been distant, it was true. His visits were less frequent. His phone calls had become brief, perfunctory. But I had attributed it to his work responsibilities, to Chloe, to the children. I figured that's what happened when kids grew up and started their own families. You become less important, less central. "No," I finally replied. "Nothing specific that I remember." But as I said this, I began to mentally review recent conversations. I remembered a lunch a few months ago where Malik had complained that Serena and I spent too much time together. I remembered him making comments about how I wasn't ambitious like other men my age. I recalled the way Langston always found a criticism, a derogatory observation about my way of life. But none of that justified what had happened in the church. That night alone in my house, I reviewed the papers I had written. They still had the dampness of my tears. I reread every carefully crafted word and phrase. I had described how Serena supported me when I decided to change careers, how she worked without complaint to support the family while I took my classes, how she gave up her own dreams of traveling the world, of becoming a labor rights attorney, of living near her sister. I had written about sacrifice, true love, a shared life that, while not extraordinary by Langston Vance's standards, had been profoundly meaningful to the two of us. I put those papers in an envelope, not knowing why. I guess I hoped for a chance to use them, a chance that might never come. 3 days later, I received a call from the notary's office. There were papers to sign, Serena's will. I went in person because I didn't trust doing this over the phone. The notary was a kind man in his 60s who respectfully handed me the document. Serena had left everything to us jointly. The house, the 2 properties we owned in the suburbs of Atlanta, her bank accounts, her insurance policies. Everything was divided between the 2 of us, with the majority passing to Malik after my death. It was what I expected, what we had planned together years ago. But that afternoon, as I drove home with those papers, I began to wonder if I really knew who my son was. That first night, after the burial, I stayed awake until 4 a.m. The house was empty in a way I had never experienced before. It wasn't just Serena's absence. It was the absence of hope, of purpose, of a reason to get up in the morning. I sat in the living room on the sofa where she used to read her novels, where her fingers left marks on the pages that I later unintentionally memorized. There was a book on the coffee table, The House of the Spirits, by Isabel Allende. She had started it 3 weeks ago. She would never finish it. The television was off. The silence was so profound that I could hear the refrigerator in the kitchen, the ticking of the wall clock that had been in our family for 20 years. These small sounds that I previously overlooked now resonated as reminders that the world kept turning, that life continued, that only I was paralyzed in this moment of transition between who I had been and who I would have to become now. I considered reviewing the will again. The papers were scattered on the dining room table, but I didn't have the emotional energy to face them again. Instead, my thoughts returned to Malik's behavior, his words at the cemetery, the way he had gradually changed over the last few years without me really noticing. I remembered the day he was born. It was June 23rd, 1984. I was 26 years old. Serena was in the hospital for 36 hours before he finally arrived. When the doctor placed him in my arms, I remember thinking he was the most fragile thing I had ever seen. His fingers were so small, his cry so piercing. I was afraid to hold him, convinced I could break him with a wrong move. Serena spent 2 weeks at home recovering. I took time off work. I spent those weeks watching her breastfeed Malik, talking to him in a low voice, rocking him when he couldn't sleep. It was as if I saw a completely different person in my wife, mother, a stronger, more determined, more complete version of the woman I had known. Malik was a difficult child during his early years. He cried a lot. He had terrible colic. But Serena never complained, never lost patience. I worked during the day as an apprentice at an electrical company, and she took care of Malik, did the shopping, cooked, and cleaned. When I got home, she simply smiled as if she had had the best day of her life. At 5 years old, Malik started elementary school. I remember taking him the first day. He was so nervous he threw up in the car, but once we entered the classroom, he calmed down. It was as if something inside him recognized that was his place. He was a good, diligent student. His teachers praised him constantly. Serena kept all his grades, all his schoolwork in a special box under our bed. In adolescence, Malik became more reserved. He spent time in his room. He didn't want me to accompany him to school events. When he turned 16, he started going out with friends. Some of them seemed to have more money than we did. I remember Malik started making comments about our house, about our car, which was already 10 years old, about my job as an electrician, which he considered working class. Serena advised me not to take these things personally. It's a phase, she would say. Teenagers are like that. They want to differentiate themselves. They want to think their parents are inferior. It's normal. But it didn't feel normal. It felt like something between the three of us was changing, breaking, drifting apart in a way I couldn't fix. When Malik went to college, he chose to study business administration. He wanted to work in finance. He wanted to be rich. He wanted a life that implicitly suggested mine wasn't enough. I didn't say anything. Serena encouraged him. Let him pursue his dreams, she insisted. He met Chloe in his sophomore year of college. She came from a wealthy family. Her father owned several clothing chains across the state. Malik changed after that encounter. He became more ambitious. His visits home became more sporadic. When he did come, he spent time talking to Serena about investments, the stock market, business opportunities. I didn't understand most of those conversations. I stayed in the living room watching television or reading while they talked in the kitchen. Serena would tell me about it afterward, trying to explain the details. But by then, my mind was already somewhere else. When Malik and Chloe got married, it was a huge wedding, 250 guests at a luxury hotel. I was uncomfortable the entire time, dressed in a suit that Serena had insisted I buy. Langston Vance was there, of course, beaming with pride for his daughter. He gave a speech during the reception. He talked about family, values, and the bright future ahead for the couple. Then he talked about Malik, about how he had raised a son worthy of his daughter, how Malik possessed the qualities he looked for in a son-in-law: success, ambition, refinement. He never mentioned Serena. He never mentioned that she had worked 38 years to make it possible for her son to get where he was, that she had given up her own dreams and aspirations. Now, sitting on that sofa in the midnight darkness, I wondered if Serena had seen this coming, if at any point she had realized that the son we raised together was ashamed of us, of our life, of our love. I got up and walked to the room Serena and I had shared for 28 years. Her side of the bed was exactly as she had left it. Her pillows still had the indentation of her head. Her scent still permeated the sheets. I opened her closet. Her clothes hung there, waiting for her to return to wear them. I allowed myself to touch a blue blouse that was my favorite. The way she wore it. The color made her eyes look brighter. I buried my face in the fabric and inhaled deeply. It was then that I noticed something I had missed before. On the talkie shelf of the closet, hidden behind a pile of sweaters, was a cardboard box. It was secured with brown packing tape. My name was written on it in Serena's handwriting. I carefully lowered the box. My heart sped up. Serena wasn't the type of person to hide things. She was transparent, honest, and direct. The fact that she had deliberately concealed this box meant something. I scraped off the tape. Inside, I found letters. Dozens of them. Some were dated years ago. The first ones were from Malik. Letters he had written but never sent, I suppose. Letters that Serena had saved, hidden, and protected. I began to read. The first one was from 2014, 5 years ago. The handwriting was Malik's, but the words were those of a man I didn't recognize. "Mom," it began, "I need you to understand something. I cannot let Dad continue to be a part of my life in the way he is. The people in my circle, my colleagues, Chloe's parents, they all see our father as a failure, as a man who never aspired to enough. And I, as his son, am being judged by association. It's time for him to understand his place." My hands trembled as I held the letter. There were more, dozens of them, all from Malik, all with the same theme, all explaining why he needed to distance himself from me, why Langston Vance had advised him to cut emotional ties with me, to find reasons to resent me, to use my mediocrity as justification for abandonment. But the most disturbing thing was discovering that Serena knew all this, that she had received these letters, that she had tried to protect me by storing them without letting me know what was really happening. I spent the rest of the night reading, processing, and understanding that everything had been planned, that Malik's behavior was not accidental. It was deliberate, orchestrated, specifically designed to build resentment, justify rejection, and create a narrative where I was the villain and he was the victim of my limitations. When the sun came up, I had made a decision. I needed to investigate further. I needed to understand exactly what Malik had done all these years, why Serena had kept these letters, and why he had been so sure he could humiliate me at the funeral. The box of letters became my obsession for the next 10 days. I couldn't stop rereading them. Each one was like a knife plunging deeper into my chest, revealing layers of betrayal I had been too blind to see. But the letters were only the beginning of what I would discover. On March 29th, I received a call from Earl Jenkins, a neighbor who lived 3 houses away. Earl was retired like me, a 64-year-old man who had worked as an accountant his whole life. We occasionally greeted each other on the street, sharing trivial conversations about the weather or gas prices, the kind of things men our age usually exchange. "Alonzo," he said over the phone, his voice careful, as if he were choosing every word precisely. "I need to talk to you about something I heard. It's delicate, but I think you have a right to know." My stomach tightened. "What's going on?" "2 weeks ago, I was at the barber shop. You know the one, Curtis's on the corner. While I was waiting my turn, I saw your son come in. He was with his father-in-law, that wealthy man, Langston, I think his name is. Well, they didn't want to be seen, I guess. They went straight to the back where Curtis's office is. I was sitting there reading a magazine, and I overheard fragments of their conversation. They were talking about you, Alonzo. I felt my blood run cold." "About me?" "Yes. Something about money, about inheritance, and about making sure Serena didn't change her will. That was 2 weeks ago before she passed." Earl paused. "I didn't know if I should tell you this, but after what happened at the funeral, I decided you had to know." I hung up after thanking him. My hands were shaking as I headed to the room where I kept the financial documents. For 38 years, Serena had insisted on keeping joint bank accounts. It was something she wanted, a way to maintain financial unity as a symbol of our commitment. I never questioned it. Now, as I pulled out the bank statements from the last 16 months, I noticed something I should have seen a long time ago. There were transfers, large transfers, $16,000 exactly, withdrawn in blocks of $2,000 over 8 months. The money had been transferred to an account I didn't recognize. I investigated further. I called the bank. After proving my identity and explaining that I was a co-holder of the account, the bank representative confirmed that those transfers had been authorized by Serena, or at least someone had used her digital signature to authorize them. But then I remembered something. About a year ago, Serena had updated her online banking password. She asked me to stay nearby while she did it. She said she didn't trust technology much and wanted to make sure she was doing it correctly. Malik was here that day. He had come to pick up something he had forgotten at the house. I remembered he was in the living room while Serena made the changes. I remembered that after that, Malik had started asking questions about our investments, where we kept our money, about life insurance, questions he had never asked before, presented in a way that seemed casual, as if he was just curious. And now I understood. Somehow, Malik had gained access to the account. He had been withdrawing money, $16,000, approximately what a man might need to pay off gambling debts, or failed investments, or simply to maintain the lifestyle Langston Vance had taught him to crave. I reread the letters I found in Serena's closet. In one of them, Malik wrote, "Mom, eventually I will have access to everything you two own. Don't force me to take steps we'll both regret. I just need you to understand that this is inevitable. The money is mine, by right. I am your son. I am your future. Dad already lived his life." My second cousin, Marcus Williams, was a civil law attorney. I called him that afternoon. I sent him copies of the bank statements and explained the situation. Marcus was direct in his response. "Alonzo, what you describe is theft, fraud, but it will be difficult to prove without Serena's cooperation. She was the joint holder of that account. Technically, both of you had the right to transfer funds. But she didn't authorize it," I protested. "My son tricked her into getting her password." "That's what you'd need to prove," Marcus replied. "And now that she has passed, it will be even more complicated. Is there anything else? Something more concrete?" I spent the next 3 weeks examining every financial document I could find. Wills, life insurance, property policies. Gradually, I began to see a broader pattern. 6 months ago, Malik had suggested to Serena that she get additional life insurance. He said it was a smart investment, that the money could be transferred to their children as an educational gift. Serena did it. A $30,000 policy. The beneficiary was Malik. 4 months ago, Malik had urged us to sell one of our properties in the Atlanta suburbs. He said prices were up, it was the perfect time, that we could invest the money in something more profitable. Serena had refused at the time, but during the last week of her life, when she was already sick and weak, she had mentioned that Malik had brought papers for her to review. Papers related to that sale. The final piece of the puzzle arrived when I found a printed email on Serena's desk. It was from a real estate office. It confirmed that on March 31st, a week after the funeral, there was an appointment scheduled to visit the property. Malik had made the appointment without telling me anything. I felt the rage boiling in my veins. It wasn't just the anger over the theft, although that was bad enough. It was the anger that Serena had known. She had kept the letters. She had allowed the transfers. She had seen all this happen and hadn't told me. Why? Was she protecting Malik? Or was she protecting me from the knowledge of what our son truly was? That night, I called Tanya, Serena's sister. I told her everything I had discovered. I asked her if she knew anything about Malik's behavior. Yes, she replied after a long silence. Serena told me a few months ago. She was worried, very worried. But she said she couldn't tell you because she feared how you would react. She feared you would confront Malik and that it would cause an irreparable conflict. So she knew and she just let it happen? She tried to stop him, Tanya explained, her voice full of compassion. She confronted him, told him to stop, but Malik simply denied everything. He said she was confused, that the transfers were to pay his taxes, that the real estate appointment was just to get valuation. She didn't know whether to believe him or not. And with everything going on with her health, with the doctors, and the treatments, she simply didn't have the energy to fight. I hung up feeling more alone than I had ever been in my life. My wife of 28 years had been suffering under the weight of this betrayal, without being able to share it with me. How many nights had I held her in bed, completely oblivious that she was keeping this secret? How many conversations had we had where she mentioned nothing because she feared my reaction? Now I understood why she hadn't protested when Malik had snatched the microphone from me at the funeral. Serena was already broken. She no longer had faith that the truth would come out. She just wanted it all to end with dignity. I spent that night reviewing the documents one last time. I took notes. I made lists. For the first time since Serena's death, I felt something that wasn't just pain. I felt determination. I felt like I finally had a purpose again. Serena had kept the letters because she knew that someday I would need them, because somehow she understood that sooner or later the truth would have to emerge. And when it did, I would have to be prepared. On April 1st, I drove to Jade Sinclair's office on Peachtree Street in Midtown Atlanta. Her law firm occupied the third floor of a modern building. I hadn't been here in years. The last time was a decade ago when Jade helped me with some papers related to the purchase of one of our properties. Jade is 56 years old. She's the daughter of my first cousin Isabel, who passed away 10 years ago. She was always a brilliant kid. She studied law at State University and specialized in financial fraud and civil law. Her reputation in the legal world is impeccable. When I entered her office, she was reviewing files on her desk. She immediately stood up when she saw me. Her expression changed from professional to genuinely concerned in a matter of seconds. "Alonzo, what happened? You look terrible," was her first comment as she offered me a chair. I didn't know where to start, so I simply handed her the documents, the bank statements, the letters I had found in Serena's closet, the emails about the property sale, the information about the additional life insurance. Jade reviewed them in silence for nearly 30 minutes, her eyes scanning each page, her expression growing progressively darker. When she finally looked up, her words were precise and direct. "Your son deliberately robbed you with premeditation. That's pretty clear. What's not clear is whether your wife was an accomplice or a victim of manipulation." I told her what Tanya had revealed, that Serena had known, that she had tried to stop him, that she had kept the letters but hidden them as if she were preparing for the moment when I would have to know the truth. Jade nodded slowly. That suggests she was under pressure. It's a common tactic. Emotional fraudsters, especially when their family, use guilt and shame to silence their victims. Serena was probably manipulated into believing she was helping her son, that this was something any compassionate mother would do. "What can I do?" I asked, feeling the weight of powerlessness on my shoulders. "Legally, it's complicated," Jade explained, leaning back in her chair. "First, the money that was transferred, $16,000, was formally authorized by Serena even if it's likely your son fraudulently obtained her password. Second, the life insurance. Serena took it out voluntarily. Malik is the rightful beneficiary according to the policy's terms. Third, the property. Even though he planned to sell it, he didn't do so before Serena passed, so technically, there's no consummated crime on that front. So, there's nothing I can do? I didn't say that, Jade replied, leaning forward. What I said is that it's complicated, but there are things we can do. First, we need to investigate how your son got access to Serena's password. If we can prove it was obtained fraudulently, that changes everything. Second, we can review the terms of the life insurance. If there's any clause that specifies beneficiaries cannot have committed fraud against the insured, then we might be able to challenge it. Third, we can document Malik's pattern of behavior. The letters you found are crucial. They demonstrate malicious intent. They show this wasn't accidental. For the next 2 hours, we worked together, reviewing every detail. Jade took notes, asking specific questions about dates, amounts, and names of people supposedly present in conversations. She asked me to describe Malik's attitude during our recent encounters, his exact words, his body language. I need you to gather some additional documentation, Jade finally said, writing a list. First, photographs of any communication you have with Malik, text messages, emails, anything where you talk about money, inheritance, your finances. Second, names of witnesses, people who witnessed suspicious behavior. This Earl, your neighbor, will be important. Third, I need to talk to Tanya. She can confirm certain things Serena told her directly. Do you think I can win a case against my son? Jade took off her reading glasses and rubbed her eyes. Alonzo, the question isn't whether you can win. The question is, what do you hope to achieve? If what you want is legal justice, then yes, I think we have a case. We can demonstrate fraud. We can seek restitution of the $16,000. We can challenge certain beneficiaries in Serena's will. But if what you want is reconciliation with your son, I advise you to let this rest. I don't want reconciliation, I replied, surprised by the coldness in my own voice. I want him to understand that his actions have consequences. I want him to know that he cannot humiliate me with impunity. Jade smiled slightly. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of an attorney recognizing her client. Then we'll start working. This will take time. But between the documents you have, the letters, the evidence of fraudulent transfers, I believe we can build a strong case. That same afternoon, I called Tanya. I explained that I needed her to talk to Jade, that she needed to confirm the details of what Serena had told her about Malik's behavior. Tanya agreed immediately. She had wanted to help from the beginning. She just hadn't known how. I also contacted Earl. I asked him if he would be willing to testify about what he had overheard at the barbershop. Absolutely, he replied, without hesitation. What happened at the funeral was unacceptable. I've seen enough disrespect in my life. I'm more than willing to help you. In the following days, I began gathering all the documentation Jade had requested. I extracted all of Malik's text messages from the last 2 years. There were so many. Some were seemingly innocent, simple questions about how I was, how Serena was. But when I read them through the lens of what I now knew, each one seemed laden with double meaning. Every question seemed to be fishing for specific information about our finances. One message in particular caught my attention. It was from 8 months ago. Malik asked, "Dad, how much money do you all have saved up, approximately?" I'm just asking because Chloe wants to know if you'd be interested in investing in a business her father is starting. I had simply replied, "We have what we need, nothing more." Why, Malik? Just curiosity, nothing important. But now I knew it wasn't curiosity. It was reconnaissance. He was assessing how much money was available to steal, how much he could take. Without me noticing, I saved all of these messages in a digital folder. The printed documents were organized chronologically in a file cabinet. I spent hours reading them, memorizing them, looking at them from every possible angle. Each one was a piece of a puzzle that, when put together, formed a picture of a young man willing to deceive, manipulate, and steal from his own mother to get what he wanted. One night, while reviewing Malik's letters one more time, I paused at a specific sentence. It was in a letter from 3 years ago. Eventually, I will be responsible for the family inheritance, and when that moment comes, Dad's legacy will be erased. His mediocrity will no longer define our family. Mediocrity. That word resonated. I hadn't thought my life was mediocre. I had worked hard, provided for my family, and loved my wife. But for Malik, that clearly wasn't enough. In his mind, I was an embarrassment that needed to be eliminated. Now, it was my turn to act. Malik called me on April 14th, 2 weeks after the funeral. His voice sounded different on the phone, softer, more conciliatory, as if he were playing a role he had practiced. "Dad, I'd like you to come for lunch. Just us. Chloe will be in a meeting with her mother all day. I have some things I want to talk to you about, important matters." I immediately knew something was wrong. Malik never invited me to lunch alone. Our meetings were always awkward encounters at restaurants where he constantly checked his watch, eager to leave. But now he sounded urgent, even needy. "What kind of matters?" I asked. "It's better if we talk about it in person." "Saturday, at 1 o'clock at the usual restaurant." We agreed on the place, a small Italian restaurant called the Olive Branch Italian Grill, 15 minutes from my house. I hung up and immediately alerted Jade. She suggested something that was both brilliant and morally questionable. "Record the conversation," she said flatly. "Use your cell phone. Most laws allow one party to a conversation to record it without the other's consent, if it's done for personal security reasons. What Malik is doing can be considered an emotional and financial threat. This recording will be admissible in certain contexts." I spent Friday practicing. I reviewed how to activate the voice recorder on my phone. I rehearsed different mental scenarios. What would Malik say? What would he reveal to me? I slept little that night, anxious about what was about to happen. On Saturday, I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes earlier than scheduled. I wanted to be there when Malik arrived. I wanted to see him walk in. I wanted to be in control of the environment from the start. I asked for a table in the corner where I could clearly observe the entrance. Malik appeared exactly at the agreed-upon time. He was wearing an expensive suit that probably cost over $1,000. His shoes were polished Italian leather. He looked prosperous, successful, like a man who had reached where he wanted to be. When he saw me, his expression briefly changed. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible flash. It was as if he took off one mask and put on another. The mask of the concerned son, the regretful son, the son who wanted to make amends. "Dad," he greeted, kissing me on both cheeks. His cologne was costly, sophisticated. "Thanks for coming." "Of course," I replied, placing my phone face down on the table. I had activated the recorder seconds before his arrival. We ordered white wine and food. Malik chose a pasta primavera. I ordered a grilled fish. While we waited, Malik started with small talk. He asked me how I was doing, how life was in the house now that I was alone. if I needed help with anything. Questions that sounded genuine, but which I knew were calculated. When the food arrived, Malik finally got to the point. Dad, I've been thinking a lot about what happened at the funeral, and I want you to know that I regret how I handled things. It was inappropriate and unexpected, even for me. Inappropriate, I repeated, watching him carefully. You humiliated your father in front of 80 people. I know, he quickly replied, raising his hands in a gesture of submission. But at that moment, Langston and I were worried that something you said might be misinterpreted. Mom was a complicated woman, you know. She had a lot of work responsibilities, a lot of pressure. We were afraid that if you talked about certain details of her private life, people might judge her. I felt my blood boil, but I maintained my composure. I was going to talk about how much I loved her, about our years together, about her sacrifices. Nothing more. Yeah. Well, Malik continued, picking at his pasta. That's what you assume you were going to say. But we know that sometimes, in emotional moments, people say things they later regret. Langston was just being preemptive. Now, I was beginning to understand. Malik wasn't truly apologizing. He was justifying, rationalizing, revising the narrative of what had happened. Langston, I asked, did he partially force you to stop me? He suggested it, Malik admitted. But I agreed. We were a team on that. The word team resonated in my mind. Malik and Langston teamed up against me, against Serena. There's something else I wanted to talk to you about, Malik continued, placing his fork on the plate. About the finances. Here it came. I felt the predator's instinct surfacing. Malik was finally showing his true intention. What about the finances? Mom left a significant amount of money, he explained, leaning forward. You know that, of course. You're the executor of her will along with me, but there are certain issues we need to discuss. Like what? Like, for example, the 2 properties in the suburbs. I think they should be sold. The market is very favorable now. We could get approximately $2 million for both. That money could be invested more productively. I have no interest in selling, I replied. Yes, but it's a waste, Malik insisted, his voice becoming a little more insistent. Those properties generate very little value. They could be working smarter. For us. For us? I questioned. The money from those properties is part of Serena's inheritance. I intend to keep them. Maybe leave them to my grandchildren when the time is right. Malik put down his fork with slight frustration. Dad, you're older. You can't work forever. Eventually, you'll need medical assistance. A nursing home. Those things are expensive. Converting those assets to cash now would be a more sensible financial decision. What Malik was describing was my death, my future incapacity, my dependence, and how my assets could be used now for his benefit under the guise of planning for my old age. I've talked to a financial advisor, he continued, taking out his phone to show me a document. Look here. If we convert the properties to cash and invest them in high-yield funds, we can double our capital in 5 years. Our capital? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Well, yeah. It's inheritance. It will eventually be for the both of us, for the family. The family, I repeated slowly. The same family that stole $16,000 from your parents' joint account. The color drained from Malik's face. His fork fell onto the plate with a metallic sound that seemed to silence the entire restaurant. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. I know about the transfers, Malik. I know how you got your mother's password. I know about your plans to sell the properties without my consent. And I know about the letters you wrote. Malik abruptly stood up. This has been a mistake. I should leave. We're staying here, I said, with a calm I didn't feel. We'll finish our lunch like civilized people. And you are going to listen to me. Malik slowly sat back down. His jaw was clenched. His hands were trembling slightly. What you did was fraud, I continued, lowering my voice so only he could hear. Manipulation, theft. What you did to your mother in her last months of life was despicable. And what you hoped to do to me after her death is equally despicable. Dad, Don't speak, I interrupted. Just listen. I have gathered documentation. I have spoken with witnesses. I have contacted lawyers. I now have options. Legal options. I can sue you. I can recover the money. I can make sure the financial industry knows exactly what kind of person you are. Malik had gone completely pale. Are you going to do it? I don't know yet, I admitted. That depends on you. It depends on whether you learn anything from this. It depends on whether you ever understand what you did. We finished the lunch in silence. Malik barely ate. When the bill came, I paid it. I left a generous tip, and then I left, knowing that I had recorded every word of his incomplete confession. 3 days passed in absolute silence after the lunch at the Olive Branch Italian Grill. Not a single call from Malik, not a message, nothing. It was the kind of silence that precedes a storm. I felt it in my bones. I knew he was planning something, that he was consulting with Langston, that they were reorganizing their strategy now that their plans had been exposed. On April 18th, I received a call from my attorney. It was Jade. Her voice sounded different, tenser, as if she had been waiting for the moment to contact me. Alonzo, I just received communication from a law firm. They represent Malik. It says your son is considering challenging certain aspects of Serena's will. Specifically, he's arguing that you, as her widower, exerted undue influence over Serena in her final days, that you pressured her to modify her testamentary provisions in your favor. I felt the floor move beneath my feet. Is that possible? Legally speaking, yes. It's a common defensive tactic. If Malik can prove there was undue influence, he can invalidate parts of the will. But here's the interesting part. The firm representing him is Vance and Associates. That's Langston Vance's law firm. So we know exactly who is funding this defense. What does that mean for me? It means we're going to have to be more aggressive, Jade replied. We need to file our case before they file theirs. We need to be the ones dictating the narrative. Do you have the recording of the lunch? I do. Perfect. Bring the phone to my office tomorrow. I need to make sure it's admissible. I also need you to bring all the original documents, the letters, the bank statements, the emails, everything. We're going to prepare a lawsuit. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the living room, thinking about everything that had happened. Thinking about Serena. Wondering if she would have known it would come to this. If some part of her had hoped I would take these actions after her death. If somehow, by keeping those letters, she had been asking me for help from the grave. On April 19th, a rainy morning, I walked into Jade's office with my documents. She listened to the recording at her desk with headphones on. As she listened, she took notes. Her expression progressively hardened. When she finished, she took off the headphones. "This is pure gold," she simply said. His own admission, his acknowledgement that he knew he had done something inappropriate. Even if the recording isn't admissible in certain contexts, the mere fact that it exists proves you have documentation of his behavior. We're going to win. How long will this last? It depends on how aggressive Malik is, but I'd estimate between 6 months and a year. Cases of financial fraud and disputed wills tend to be long and complicated. 6 months, a year. Time seemed both so long and so short at the same time. Meanwhile, what would Maliki do? How would he react now that he knew I was moving against him legally? The answer came on April 23rd. A Thursday afternoon, Malik called me. His voice wasn't conciliatory this time. It was harsh, cutting, like a blade through cloth. I've talked to my lawyers, Dad, and they want you to know that if you continue pursuing this, we will make certain details public about Mom, about her mental health, about the medication she was taking, about how she was saying confusing things during her last months. We are going to argue that she was not in her right mind when she made some of her financial arrangements with you. The threat was clear. Malik was using Serena's memory as a weapon. He was threatening to tarnish her reputation if I didn't back down. Do you understand what I'm saying, Dad? Malik continued, venom dripping from every word. You have two options. You withdraw your lawsuit and all this goes away. Or we publicly expose Mom as a woman suffering from early dementia. Do you think that's what she would have wanted? I hung up without responding. My hands trembled as I dialed Jade's number. It's a desperate move, she explained when I told her what Malik had said. It's an admission of guilt. He's using emotional extortion. That's illegal. Alonzo, I can add that to our case. That actually strengthens our position significantly. He's threatening to destroy Serena's memory. I know, and it's despicable. But it also shows how far he's willing to go. It shows he has no morals, that he's desperate. When a man like that acts this way, it means he knows he's losing. And 2 days later, I received another message, this time from Chloe, Malik's wife. Her message was different. It was written in a softer, almost maternal tone. Alonzo, I don't know if Malik told you, but things between us are very tense. He doesn't sleep, barely eats. He's obsessed with this situation. With you. Langston is putting ideas in his head that are making him paranoid. Please, consider that the children are suffering because of this. There's no way to resolve this without it going to court. I replied politely, Chloe, I understand your concern, but this is between your husband and me. I didn't want it to come to this, but your husband made certain choices that have consequences. An hour later, Malik called me again. This time his voice had a different tone. It wasn't threatening, it was almost pleading, as if he were about to break. Dad, I talked to Chloe. She's right. I've been in a kind of trance. Langston has been putting ideas in my head, things I shouldn't have done, money I shouldn't have taken. Dad, I'm asking you to hear me out. Part of me wanted to believe he was repenting, that he had finally understood the magnitude of his actions. But too much time had passed. I had read too many letters. I had seen too much evidence of premeditation. This wasn't sincere repentance. It was another tactic, another attempt at manipulation. I've worked with my attorney, I told him calmly. We've documented everything. Your fraud, your threats, your attempts at manipulation. The case will go forward, Malik. Then you won't let this end, will you? His voice cracked. No, I replied. This will end when you learn that actions have consequences. When you understand that people cannot be betrayed without repercussions, and when you finally value the sacrifice your mother made for you. I hung up before he could respond. That night, I received an email from Jade with an attached document. It was the first draft of our lawsuit. 84 pages detailing every incident, every fraudulent transfer, every recorded threat, every lie. It was comprehensive. It was devastating. It was the culmination of 3 weeks of rigorous investigation. I read every page slowly. And as I did, I experienced an emotion I had been avoiding for weeks. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't revenge. It was resignation. It was the acceptance that my relationship with my son was over, that we would never recover what we once had, that the damage was too deep to be repaired. But it was also clarity. I finally knew who Malik truly was, and I was finally in a position to do something about it. During the first week of May, I started noticing strange movements in my bank accounts, small transfers, deposits I hadn't authorized. At first, I thought it was a bank error. I called to investigate. What they discovered was unsettling. Someone had tried to access my accounts. Multiple failed attempts, incorrect passwords entered again and again. The attempts stopped after the system blocked the account for security, but the intention was clear. Malik was trying to do exactly what he had done to Serena: seek access, seek money, seek control. I showed the records to Jade. She added this to the lawsuit as evidence of continuous harassment and patterns of criminal behavior. This shows it wasn't an isolated incident, she explained. This demonstrates systematic conduct, a pattern. But what happened 3 days later was even more disturbing. I received a call from the real estate office that had made the appointment to visit our property. The agent identified himself as Reginald Fields, a man in his 50s who had been selling properties in the area for 20 years. "Mr. Dubois," he began, his tone carefully professional, "I have an uncomfortable situation to report. A week ago, a client came to my office requesting information about a specific property. He said he was the owner, that he wanted to sell it. He showed me documentation that seemed authentic, but when I checked our files, the documents he showed had inconsistencies." "What kind of inconsistencies?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Well, the registered owner in our files is you, but the man who came to my office, a Malik Dubois, claimed to be the owner. He said he had recently inherited the property. When I asked him to show me the will, he produced a document that had the correct notary letterhead, but the signature looked forged. I have 30 years of experience, Mr. Dubois. I recognize a fake document when I see one." My heart started racing. "What did you do?" "I canceled the appointment. I told him I would need to speak with you directly before proceeding with any sale." He got angry, very angry. He started yelling. He said the two of you were in a dispute over the property and that he was the legitimate beneficiary. Then he left. But I thought I should inform you because, well, that's clearly a fraudulent situation. "I'm enormously grateful," I replied. "Can I come see those documents?" I visited Reginald's office that afternoon. He showed me exactly what Malik had presented: the fake will, the altered property documents, all designed to make it seem as if Malik were the legitimate owner of the property and had the right to sell it. The sophistication of the fraud was astonishing. It wasn't the work of someone improvising. It was the work of someone with access to resources, to lawyers, to professional forgers. Langston Vance had to be involved. I asked Reginald to give me copies of everything: the fake documents, the date and time records of the transaction, everything. He agreed without hesitation. "This is document fraud," he said. "You should report it to the police." "I will," I confirmed. "But first, I need these documents to be part of a civil case we are already preparing." That night, I called Jade. I sent her photos of the forged documents. Her response was immediate. "This is huge, Alonzo. This is aggravated document fraud. This isn't just a civil case. This is criminal. We need to report this to the police. This proves that Malik, with Langston Vance's assistance, was trying to sell a property that didn't belong to him, using forged documents. This is serious. What does it mean for us? It means we have more than enough ammunition. It means I can add criminal charges to our lawsuit. It means Malik is facing not only loss in a civil case, but also potential criminal consequences. A week later, Jade filed the formal lawsuit. 84 pages of meticulously documented accusations, financial fraud, document forgery, theft, harassment, emotional extortion, unauthorized access attempts to banking systems. Everything was there, in black and white. Indisputable. Malik was notified on May 29th. The lawsuit was personally delivered to his business address. According to Jade, his reaction was explosive. He contacted Langston Vance immediately. The two began making calls, contacting other lawyers, reorganizing their defensive strategy, but it was too late. The cat was out of the bag. In the following days, I received multiple communications from Malik. First, they were veiled threats. Then they were attempts at negotiation. Finally, they were pleas. Messages that came through his lawyer, offering to settle the dispute out of court, offering restitution of the money, offering practically anything to make the case disappear. But Jade advised me not to accept any settlement. Not yet, she insisted. Wait until he feels the pressure of the legal system. Wait until he faces the real possibility of criminal charges. Then when he's truly scared, we can negotiate from a position of absolute strength. Communications also began arriving from Chloe, calls from my friends who knew Malik socially, messages from people who worried about maintaining family peace, all suggesting I make amends, all suggesting that the details weren't as important as reconciliation. But I knew better. I knew the reconciliation they were suggesting was simply allowing Malik to continue his manipulations, allowing him to live without consequences, allowing him to believe he could betray his family and get away with it. The night before Malik's youngest child's christening, Jade called me. Alonzo, I need you to know that Malik has rejected every settlement offer. His lawyers are preparing a vigorous defense. They are going to argue that all the transactions were authorized by Serena, that the documents were prepared with the professional's consent, that there is no fraud, and that instead you are the one committing fraud by trying to keep assets that legitimately belong to your son through inheritance. Do you think they'll win? No, Jade replied without hesitation. Not with the evidence we have, but they are going to make it nasty. They are going to try to destroy your character. They are going to try to make you look like a vengeful father, trying to punish a son for personal reasons. It's going to be an ugly battle. When does the trial begin? The first hearing is scheduled for September. We have 4 months to prepare our case completely. 4 months for Malik to face the reality of what he has done. I hung up, thinking about those 4 months, about the christening that was about to happen, about the way Malik would try to act as if nothing had changed. Dahlia, if our lives weren't about to be transformed by what was about to happen. But I knew something fundamental had changed. I had gone from being a victim of my son's betrayal to an active agent of justice. I had gathered evidence, I had contacted lawyers, I had documented every transgression. I was ready. Malik's grandson's christening was scheduled for June 5th, a sunny Saturday. A celebration of new life, a family occasion. But I knew something more important was going to happen that day, something that would change everything, something I had been secretly planning for weeks. The night before the christening, I couldn't sleep. I was lying in the bed I had shared with Serena for 28 years, watching the shadows move across the ceiling. My mind was in a state of constant agitation. I mentally reviewed every detail of what was about to happen, every word I planned to say, every possible reaction Malik might have. At 3 in the morning, I got up and walked to the living room. The silence of the house was deafening. Without Serena, without the sound of her breathing in the next room, the house felt like a mausoleum, a monument to everything I had lost. Not just my wife, but also the illusion I had about who my son was. I sat in front of the window, looking out at the dark street. The streetlights cast yellow light onto the pavement, wet with morning dew. I thought about the day Malik was born, how Serena had put him in my arms, her eyes full of hope and love, how I had silently promised to protect him, educate him, and love him unconditionally. At what moment did everything go wrong? When did the boy I loved start turning into the man who was now willing to deceive me, steal from me, and forge documents? Was it my fault? Had I failed somehow as a father? These questions tormented me, but at the same time, I knew I had no answers. Guilt was a luxury I couldn't afford at that moment. What I needed was clarity and determination. At 6 a.m., I called Jade. I knew she was probably sleeping, but I needed to talk to someone. I needed to confirm that I was doing the right thing. "Alonzo?" she answered after several rings, her voice still sleepy. "Are you okay?" "I can't sleep," I admitted. "I'm doubting. Doubting if I should do this. Doubting if exposing everything publicly is really what I want." "What do you really want?" Jade asked, and I could hear her sitting up, waking completely. The question was harder to answer than I expected. "I want him to understand what he did. I want him to face consequences, but also, I want him to be my son. I wish this had never happened." "Alonzo, listen to me," Jade said, her voice taking a more professional, but also more compassionate tone. "What Malik didn't happen by accident. It wasn't a youthful mistake. It was deliberate. It was planned. And when you confronted his actions, instead of repenting, he escalated. He tried to sell your property. He forged documents. He threatened your reputation. This doesn't stop on its own, Alonzo. People like this don't change because they feel bad. They change when they face real consequences. And if I destroy him in the process, what if my lawsuit financially ruins him? Then he will have learned a very expensive lesson," Jade replied flatly. "Sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes that's the only language people like that understand." I hung up, feeling a little better, though not completely. I spent the next day in a kind of trance. I took a shower, I shaved carefully. I chose clothes that were elegant, but not too formal. A navy blue blazer, cream-colored pants, black leather shoes. I wanted to look like what I was, a dignified man, a man who had lived a full life and had nothing to be ashamed of. At 3 in the afternoon, I received a call from Tanya, my sister-in-law. "Alonzo, I know what you're planning to do at the christening," she began without preamble. "Jade told me. I wanted you to know that Serena would have wanted you to do it. She hated seeing her son turn into what he's become, but she didn't know how to stop him. So I hope you, in her memory, do what she couldn't do." Tanya's words touched me deeply. She gave me the permission I didn't know I needed. Permission from someone who had loved Serena. Permission from someone who had also witnessed the betrayal. "Will you be there?" I asked. "Of course," she replied. "I'll be sitting near the front, and when the time comes, when you take the microphone, I'll be watching Amalika's face and I'll be internally celebrating every second of discomfort he feels. When I hung up, I realized my hands were trembling. But it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. A feeling that finally, after all these weeks, the pieces were about to fall into place. I spent the hours before the christening mentally reviewing what I was about to say. I didn't have papers this time, not like at Serena's funeral. I had memorized every word, every phrase, every transition. I wanted it to be spontaneous, to look as if I were revealing the truth in real time, not reading from a prepared script. At 6 p.m, I drove to the event hall where the christening reception would be held. It was an elegant venue. The hall was decorated in pastel tones, round tables with white tablecloths, fresh flowers in every centerpiece. Approximately 70 people were already there. Malik's friends, Chloe's friends, extended family, some of the same as that had been at Serena's funeral. Malik was standing at the entrance, beaming in a new suit that surely cost more than $5,000. Chloe was by his side, holding the baby who was being christened. Their younger children were playing near the tables. Everything looked perfect, normal, as if nothing strange were happening. When Malik saw me, his expression briefly changed. A flash of anxiety crossed his face. Then he smiled again, but it was a forced smile. He knew I would be here. He knew something was about to happen. I sat at a table with Tanya and some of Serena's friends, whom I had invited. They hugged me. They whispered words of support. "We're with you," one said. "We know what he did," said another. It was comforting to know I wasn't alone in this. During the formal christening ceremony, which took place in a small chapel within the hall, I stood near the baptismal font. I watched as the pastor poured water over the baby's head. I listened as Malik affirmed his commitment to raising the child in the faith. The words sounded hollow, empty, as if they came from a man without a soul. After the ceremony, during the reception, the speeches began. Langston Vance spoke first, of course. He talked about the importance of family, values, and continuity. His words made me feel sick. Then Chloe made a brief comment, thanking everyone for attending. Then, several friends stood up to offer toasts. The atmosphere was relaxed, celebratory. No one suspected what was about to happen. When the master of ceremonies asked if anyone else wanted to make a speech, I slowly stood up. The hall went silent. Everyone was looking at me. Malik specifically tensed up. I could see him speaking quickly to Langston. Both stood up from their seats. I walked to the microphone on the podium. My heart was pounding, but my voice was firm. "Good evening, everyone," I began. "My name is Alonzo Dubois. I am the grandfather of this beautiful baby christened today, and I am here to talk about family." Malik began walking toward the front of the hall. His face was red. Langston was behind him, whispering something, but I continued. "Family is important. It is the most important thing. But family also requires honesty. It requires integrity. It requires that we love each other enough to be truthful, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." "Malik, stop!" I ordered, looking directly at him. His jaw was clenched. His fists were closed. What I am about to reveal, I do not do for revenge. I do it because I believe the truth is important, and because I believe Serena, Malik's mother, deserves to have the truth spoken in her name. It was then that Malik reached the podium. He tried to snatch the microphone from me, exactly as he had done at the funeral. But this time I was prepared. I stepped back, keeping the microphone out of his reach. "Security!" Langston shouted from the back of the room, but it was too late. Everyone was watching now, and I had started to speak. At my wife's funeral, my son forbade me to speak, I began, keeping the microphone away as Malik tried to reach for it again. A security guard from the hall finally intervened, placing himself between us. He ordered me to shut up, to sit down. He humiliated me in front of 80 people. That day I didn't understand why. Today, everyone is going to understand why. Malik was red with fury. He was shouting things that couldn't be heard over the murmur of the crowd. Chloe had stood up, startled. Her children were confused, not understanding what was happening. Tanya was also standing, watching every moment with an expression of quiet support. After the funeral, I continued, my voice firm despite the chaos unfolding around me. I started investigating. I found letters my son wrote to his mother, letters clearly explaining his plan, his intention to separate from me, to manipulate her, to gain access to our finances. The faces in the room had changed. The celebratory atmosphere had evaporated. Now there was confusion, unease. Some guests were starting to whisper among themselves. "My son," I said slowly, pronouncing each word carefully. "He stole $16,000 from the bank account he shared with my wife. He did it using a password he obtained fraudulently. He did it during the months his mother was battling a terminal illness." Langston Vance was shouting now, calling for the hall staff. Malik was still trying to get to me, but the guard held him back. The christening baby was crying. Chloe was rocking him desperately, her eyes darting between me and her husband, in horror. "When I confronted my son about these transfers," I continued, "instead of admitting and apologizing, he tried to sell one of our properties, a property that did not belong to him. He used forged documents that were prepared with the assistance of his father-in-law, Langston Vance, who is an attorney and should know better." Now, there was complete chaos. Some guests were getting up. Others were recording with their cell phones. News of this would spread. I knew it. Social media would disseminate this. The humiliation would be public and permanent. "Also," I continued, raising my voice to be heard over the noise, "when I took legal action to protect myself and my estate, my son threatened me. He threatened to expose his mother as a woman with dementia, to destroy her memory, to use it as a weapon against me if I did not withdraw my lawsuits." Malik finally managed to break the security guard's grip. He lunged toward the podium, but instead of reaching me, he stumbled, falling to the floor in front of everyone. He quickly got up, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. Now it was he who was being humiliated in front of 70 people, in front of his friends, in front of his extended family. It was a perfect mirror of what he had done to me at the funeral. "What I am going to say now is the most important part," I said, waiting for the chaos to subside a bit. "Because I am not here simply to air dirty laundry. I am here because I believe in consequences. I believe in accountability. I believe that people must be responsible for their actions." The hall was quieter now. Even Malik had stopped, breathing heavily, waiting to see what would come next. "Therefore, here and now, in front of all these witnesses, I formally declare, I announce that I have modified my will. My estate, my properties, my savings, everything that should have gone to my son, Malik Dubois, will now go to my sister-in-law, Tanya Johnson." I could see Malik's face change. First it went blank, then it exploded again. "What?" he yelled. "You can't do that. I'm disinherited." "Exactly," I confirmed. "You are disinherited. Not because you are my son, and it's easy. You are disinherited because you violated the most sacred contract that exists, the contract between a father and son. Because you chose greed over loyalty, because you chose deceit over honesty. This is a lie, Malik shouted, now addressing the audience. I am being unjustly accused. My father is a liar. He's taking revenge on me. The evidence is in the hands of my attorney, I replied calmly. Complete documentation, bank transfers, forged documents, recorded threats, letters in your own handwriting. Everything will be presented in court in September. But in the meantime, I wanted the truth to be known here, to be heard publicly, because you deserve to be known for who you truly are. Tanya had approached the podium. I put my arm around her. Her eyes were filled with tears, but it was an expression of support, of justice, finally achieved. My sister-in-law, I continued, addressing the public, has been a woman of exceptional character. She has stood by me during this crisis. She helped her sister Serena when she faced the abuses of our son. She has been my emotional support when I have been lost. She deserves to inherit what our son has rejected through his ex-wounds. But I also stipulate this, I added, looking directly at Malik. Tanya will use that inheritance to ensure my grandchildren receive an education, that they are raised properly, that they do not suffer for their father's actions. But you, Malik, will not receive a single dollar. You will receive nothing. For the rest of your life, you will live knowing that your greed cost you your inheritance, that your dishonesty cost you your relationship with your father, that your malice will isolate you from your own family. Now then, I continued, there is something else I need everyone to understand. This is not an act of revenge. It is an act of justice. It is a declaration that in this family, integrity matters, honesty matters, and respect for others matters. I stepped down from the podium and handed the microphone to the master of ceremonies. The people in the hall were completely silent. Some were recording. Others were whispering. Some were simply looking at Malik with new eyes, eyes that saw who he truly was. I walked over to where Tanya was. Together, we headed toward the door. As I walked, I passed close to Chloe. She was holding the baby, her eyes red from crying. I'm sorry, I said softly, but your husband made his own choices, and now he must live with the consequences. Dad, wait, Malik screamed behind me. Please, can we talk? Can we fix it? I didn't turn around. I didn't answer. I simply walked out of the hall. In the car, as Tanya drove us away from the venue, I allowed the emotions to finally surge. I cried. I cried for Serena. I cried for the relationship I had lost with my son. I cried for the time I had invested in a man who turned out to be fundamentally corrupt. But I also cried with relief, because finally, after months of anguish, after months of uncertainty, I had spoken the truth publicly, completely, irrevocably. How do you feel? Tanya asked, her eyes on the road. I'm at peace, I replied, and I found it was true. Finally, I am at peace. 3 months after the christening, the first court hearing took place in an austere courtroom at the Fulton County Courthouse. Jade presented our case with precision and clarity. Documents were exhibited, recordings were played, witnesses testified. Earl described what he had overheard at the barbershop. Tanya confirmed the conversation Serena had shared with her. Reginald Fields, the real estate agent, presented the forged documents Malik had tried to use. Malik was sitting in the room, accompanied by his lawyers from Vance and Associates. His expression was different. There was no arrogance now, no self-assurance of someone who thought he could get away with it. Now there was only panic, calculation, and desperation. The judge, a 62-year-old woman named Judge Aaliyah Thompson, listened to everything without interruption. She took notes. She observed the documents. Occasionally, she looked at Malik with an expression that suggested disgust. When she finally closed the case for deliberation, she said something that resonated deeply with me. "I have heard many cases of family disputes in my 30 years on the bench," she declared. "But seldom have I seen such a systematic and premeditated level of fraud directed against one's own parents." This is a particularly disturbing case where greed, manipulation, and deceit were used not only to obtain money, but also to emotionally and socially harm the victim. The sentence arrived 2 weeks later. Malik was ordered to restore $32,000, not just the $16,000 he had stolen, but also interest and legal costs. Furthermore, he was declared responsible for document fraud. The case was referred to criminal authorities for further investigation, but what was more significant was that Serena's will was fully validated. Her provisions would remain intact. I would remain the heir to her estate, and the modification I had made to my own will, leaving everything to Tanya instead of Malik, was declared valid and binding. Malik appealed the sentence, of course. His lawyers argued he was unjustly convicted, that he was being punished for complicated family dynamics, that the evidence was circumstantial. But the appeal was rejected. The Court of Appeals upheld the original sentence. Malik would have to pay. He would have to face the consequences. After the final sentence, I received a letter from Chloe. It was brief but impactful. "Alonzo, I don't know if you can ever forgive me for what happened. I didn't know the truth about what Malik was doing. If I had known, I would have tried to stop him. He changed after he started working with Langston. He became different, greedier, more manipulative. I have made the decision to separate from him. I cannot be with a man who betrays his own family in this way. Our children ask about you. I would like you to be able to see them occasionally, but I understand if you don't want to. I have visited my grandchildren once a month after that. They were good children, innocent of their father's crimes. They didn't deserve to suffer for his actions. Chloe was kind to me. She never blamed me, and I never blamed her. She was a victim too, in a way. A victim of the man her husband had become. In September 2019, exactly 6 months after Serena's funeral, I made a decision. I decided to sell my house in Atlanta. I decided to leave behind the city where I had spent the last 30 years. I decided to start over with Tanya and her family. I bought a small house on the coast of South Carolina in a town called Beaufort. It was a white stone house with a view of the Atlantic. It had a small garden where I could grow tomatoes and herbs. It had a balcony where I could spend my afternoons reading. It was perfect. During the first month in my new home, I spent most of the time simply existing, walking on the beaches, watching the sun sink below the horizon every night, eating slowly, sleeping deeply. It was as if my body was finally discovering that it was safe, that it could rest. Tanya lived 3 houses away. She frequently came over to bring me food she had prepared. We sat on my balcony, looking at the ocean, talking about Serena, about the good times, about the moments we had shared as a family. We never mentioned Malik. It wasn't necessary. A year later, I received some news. Malik had moved to Charlotte. His businesses had collapsed after the truth about his frauds became public. Several of his client accounts had been frozen. His business partners had abandoned him. No one wanted to work with a man who had been convicted of fraud. Chloe and the children had also moved to a different city. Chloe finally divorced Malik. She obtained shared custody of the children. She was working as an administrative assistant in an insurance office. It was a humble life, but it was honest. It was dignified. I continued to visit my grandchildren. Sometimes I took them to the beach. We read stories together. I helped them with their homework. They gradually started to understand me, to see that I wasn't the villain, their father had perhaps taught them to believe I was. They were good kids, intelligent, compassionate. They had the potential to become better people than their father. 2 years after moving to the coast, one day I received a visit. A 36-year-old man named Derek. He was my godson. I hadn't seen him in 15 years. He told me he had read about my case, that he had seen fragments of what happened at the christening online, that he wanted to talk to me. We spent the afternoon together on my balcony. Derek was a thoughtful man who spent a lot of time thinking about his own family and his own responsibilities. At the end of the afternoon, he asked me something that made me reflect deeply. "Have you ever considered forgiving Malik?" he asked. I reflected on it for a long time. "Forgiving doesn't mean being in contact with him," I finally replied. "Forgiving means allowing my wounds to heal. It means not allowing his malice to continue defining me. And I have done that. I have healed. I have moved on. But forgiving doesn't mean I should allow him back into my life. Some damages cannot be repaired. Some crimes have permanent consequences." Derek nodded as if this were the answer he expected to hear. Now, as I write this, I am 65 years old. I am fully retired. I spend my days reading, walking, and tending my garden. I sleep without nightmares. I eat without heartburn. I have recovered the peace that Malik had stolen from me. Sometimes in the mornings, when I wake up and hear the sound of the ocean, I think of Serena. I think of what she was to me, of the sacrifice she made, of how she, even in her last days, tried to protect me by keeping those letters. I speak to the wind. I tell it about my days. I tell it that I have found peace, that I am well. And in those moments, I swear I can hear her voice, carried by the Atlantic breeze, telling me that she is proud of me, that I did the right thing, that there is no dishonor in defending your dignity, in demanding justice, in protecting your life from those who seek to exploit it. Malik still lives in Charlotte. According to what I've heard, he has tried to rebuild his life, but the reputation he built was destroyed. No one wants to work with him. His friends abandoned him. Even his own parents-in-law distanced themselves after learning the truth of his actions. He lives a life of self-imposed isolation, not because I chose it for him, but because he chose his own actions. This is the lesson I wanted him to learn, not to be rich or successful, but that actions have consequences, that integrity matters, that family is sacred and must not be betrayed by greed. I will never be the grandfather I should have been to his children. We will never travel together. I will never share college graduations. I will never be the stable presence in their lives that I could have been. And that is the greatest loss of all. It is not my loss. It is his. He sacrificed his own family for money he never came to need. And now he must live with that. As I sit here on my balcony, watching the sun set over the ocean, I know I have gained something more valuable than money. I have gained my dignity. I have gained my peace of mind. I have gained the satisfaction of knowing that I faced injustice and overcame it. This is my story, a story of betrayal, but also a story of resilience, of justice, of a man who stood up after being humiliated and declared that his life mattered, that his dignity could not be stolen, that he deserved to be respected. And although the road was painful, although the cost was high, I know I did the right thing. I know Serena would have been proud. And that knowledge is enough. Did you like my story? If you listened till the end, drop a number 1 in the comments. If you enjoyed it, you can support me by liking the video and sending a small tip. I've got lots of other life stories like this on my channel, so make sure to subscribe and check them out. I've added 2 new stories on screen that everyone loves. Thanks for being here. See you in the next one. With love.